Good evening, comrades. Thank you for joining us for my Why Marx, the Communist Culture Club. Tonight we're taking a look at a really good writer, Ursula K. Le Guin, or Ursula, that's the American way. She's an American author. And introducing her to us is Lee Garratt, who's an author himself. And then we're opening up after the introduction for comments and questions, as always. Hi, Lee. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Tina. Should I start?
Yes, you start. I'll start the PowerPoint in a minute.
Okay, right. So yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my presentation on the radical worlds of Ursula K. Le Guin. So I think Le Guin, actually, she's very much a writer in vogue. I think it's been my experience that writers I'm old enough now to see the kind of how things change over time. And writers experience upturns and downturns, I think, in their fortunes. And I think it's fair to say that Le Guin, since the death in 2018, I would say, has very much had an upturn in hers. And I think social media has played a part in this. And she's quite lucky, I mean, as well as being a writer of genius, which she'll come to, she's very good at the old epithet. She's very good at making pithy and truthful statements. And it lends itself very well to the TikTok generation, I think. So I see lots of her things now on social media, which is nice, because for a long time, I thought she was relatively niche. I think she's definitely now more famous now than she ever has been in my life before, which is quite interesting. I was lucky, however, that she's not a recent discovery for me. I discovered her as a child, and I was lucky that my village had a great library within a walking distance of my home. So firstly, as a child, my mother would take me, and then later I'd go alone. It became something of a sanctuary for me. And being a child and not really having any real context, my progress through Milner's Library's bookshelves was an organic one. And I stumbled upon and consumed many things. And at some point, I came across this book, The Wizard of Earthsea. Oh, I hope I've mirrored the screen so you can see that. Have I mirrored the screen, Tina? Can you see that? Okay, I'll carry on. I'm assuming you have.
Hold it up a bit higher.
The Earthsea books. Oh, yeah. Earthsea books. Now, the Earthsea books hold an interesting place in the oeuvre of Le Guin. They're children's literature. Her other works that she's known for are adult ones. Although I would definitely say that the children's part of this should be in apostrophes, as the themes are very adult ones, really. There's a lot of dwelling on death. The second one is, I don't know a book that dwells on more on death. So it's odd in a way that they're seen as children's books. They also most definitely inhabit the fantasy genre. Now, if I'm imagining most of you coming onto this probably know about this stuff, but we're thinking woods and magic rather than space travel and technology. Now, most authors, even great ones, they make the mark on one genre of literature. Le Guin, similar to the wide-ranging themes in her books, I think, is harder to contain. She's a renowned essayist. She's a children's author, as we've seen. In the world of fantasy, these books are now seen as classics of the genre, foundational classics, really. And I think if anyone thought J.K. Rowling was being original, that's not a diss, by the way. Everyone stands on the shoulders of giants. But if anyone thought J.K. Rowling was being original in her Harry Potter books, you only need to read this to see where she's got the idea. And most famously, Le Guin is famous as a giant of science fiction. Before we delve too much more into her literature, however, I thought it was worth to have a quick look at her life, because I think it is an interesting one. She was born in 1929 into the rarefied world of the liberal American intelligentsia, Berkeley, California, where her mother and father were both famous in their own rights. They were a Theodora and an Alfred Kruger. They were very much intellectuals. They were writers. They were anthropologists. They had a special interest in the Indians, Native Americans, and were perhaps most famous for their work on the Indians of California, a group little written about at that time and since, as far as I can see. They documented, in effect, these people's genocide and their loss, both a physical and a cultural one in the landscape. Le Guin was deeply affected by her parents' work. She wrote, "We are the inhabitants of a lost world." By the way, when I'm quoting, I quote quite extensively from, can you just show this book a second, Tina? Maybe she's gone. Yeah, this one. This is a selection. If you like some of these essays I'm quoting from, this is a book I'm getting them from. This is a selected non-fiction of the Guin. So quoting a lot from that. And she writes in this, she writes, "We are the inhabitants of a lost world. It is utterly lost. Even the names are lost. The people who lived here, in this place, California, on these hills, for tens of thousands of years, are remembered in the language of the conquistadors. For example, the San Franciscos, names taken from foreign demigods." She goes on, "But what those people, the Native Americans, the Indians, call themselves, we do not know. The names were forgotten even before the people were wiped out. There was no past, it was a tabula rasa." The history of California had the final solution for its first chapter. You can see there that Le Guin does not say things lightly. She doesn't dilly-dally with the words. Now, sometimes in biographies that I've read, I think you can see that it's quite hard to make a direct connection between the parents and the children. And I think sometimes I've seen a writer struggling to make these links. I think with Le Guin, it's obvious. Le Guin, in her writing, is very influenced by her parents. I think she's the ultimate anthropologist in fiction. She makes worlds that she would investigate with the keen eye of a scientist, but always like her parents, with a deep sense of humanity and empathy for the people who live there. I think perhaps one of the reasons her books are so successful is because, as an anthropologist, she developed a world so successfully. Her worlds are fully formed with the people's places on it, in a world of history and culture, imagined ones, of course, with a physical geography. They're all deeply imagined. So, to return to this book, Wizard of Earthsea, I think as a child, one of the things that attracted me to her then, as now, was her plainness, I think, of the prose. That's not a criticism, it's a praise. The clarity of her writing. I'm going to read a section of this now to demonstrate. And this is the first page. Okay, this is the first page I read all those years ago, 35 years ago. Longer than that. It's a lot longer than that, actually. Right, chapter 1, Warriors in the Mist. The island of Gaunt, a single mountain that lifts its peak a mile above the storm-racked northeast sea, is a land famous for wizards. From the towns in its high valleys and the ports on its dark, narrow bays, many a Gauntish man has gone forth to serve the lords of the archipelago in their cities as wizard or mage, or, looking for adventure, to wander, working magic from isle to isle of all Earthsea. Of these, some say the greatest, and surely the greatest voyager, was the man called Sparrowhawk, who in his day became both Dragon Lord and Archmage. His life is told of in the Deed of Jed, and in many songs, but this is the tale of the time before his fame, before the songs were made. In my view, that's perfectly pitched for the audience, read and understandable, with a supple, fluid, clear prose. So, Earthsea, you can put the map up now of the slide of the map, maybe, Tina, might make it a bit more visible. Earthsea is a fantasy land. It's an archipelago where magic rules. And I think it's how Le Guin conceives of magic that signals of greatness. I think if maybe the first signal of a greatness for the literature community in 1968. For generally, I would say, in literature, magic just is. There's a wizard, there's a funny wand, there's some hocus pocus, and there you go. It's fun, I think, but not, I would suggest, certainly as an adult, deeply satisfying. It's what I would call something of a cheat. But what Le Guin does in these books is radically indifferent. For in Earthsea, the real magic is knowing and having command over the real names of things, the true names of things. It's in the learning of these real names of something, be it a goat or a dragon, that you result in having power over it. I'll read a couple of excerpts of that to demonstrate this. So again, really near the start of the book. Next day, herding the long-haired goats on the meadows of Highfall, Dunny shouted to them the words he had heard, not knowing their use or meaning or what kind of words they were. Noth, hieth, malk, man, hjolk, han, mirth, han. He yelled the rhyme aloud, and the goats came to him. They came very quickly, all of them together, not making any sound. They looked at him out of the dark slot in their yellow eyes. Dunny laughed and shouted it out again, the rhyme that gave him power over the goats. They came closer, crowding and cheering. So he learned he had a gift for learning these words, and he went to study them. But, as always in literature, you never get there's no free gift. Everything comes with a cost, and he learns this later. This is now where he's at Wizard School. The master hand looked at the jewel that glittered on Jed's palm, bright as the prize of a dragon's hoard. The old master murmured one word, "Tolk," and there lay the pebble, no jewel, but a rough grey bit of rock. The master took it and held it out in his own hand. "This is a rock, Tolk in the true speech," he said, looking mildly up at Jed now. "A bit of the stone of which Roke Isle is made, a little bit of the dry land on which men live. It is itself. It is part of the world. By the illusion change, you can make it look like a diamond, or a flower, or a fly, or an eye, or a flame." The rock flickered from shape to shape as he named them and returned to rock. "But that is mere seeming. Illusion fools the beholder's senses. It makes him see and hear and feel that the thing is changed. But it does not change the thing. To change this rock into a jewel, you must change its true name. And to do that, my son, even to so small a scrap of the world, is to change the world. It can be done. Indeed, it can be done. It is the art of the master changer, and you will learn it when you are ready to learn it. But you must not change one thing, one pebble, one grain of sand until you know what good and evil will follow on the act. The world is in balance, in equilibrium. A wizard's power of changing and of summoning can shake the balance of the world. It is dangerous, that power. It is most perilous. It must follow knowledge and serve need. To light a candle is to cast a shadow." So, here in Earthsea, there is a difference between the subjective reality of the world of our senses and the real, true world behind it. So in a sense, Jed and Sparrowhawk's quest in these books is for the knowledge of the world as it is, not how we perceive it. At some point in the book, Jed is in mortal danger when he, by overreaching through his male arrogance and anger, separates himself from his shadow. Jed manages to reconcile himself with his shadow, but listen to how Le Guin words this. Remember that this was a book on the shelves for children. Jed had neither lost nor won, but naming the shadow of his death with his own name had made himself whole. A man who, knowing his whole true self, cannot be used or possessed by any power other than himself. Now, as you might be picking up from these excerpts, Le Guin was, as any good child of the 60s, deeply fascinated and influenced by teachings from the East, and in particular that most radical of Eastern philosophies, Taoism. The way, the quest for self-knowledge, following the path of balance of yin-yang, she incorporated within her writing in a way that seemed real and genuine to the worlds that you found yourself in. Even in the very start, actually, there's a pithy little preface, and it says, "Only in silence the word, only in dark the light, only in dying life, bright the hawk's flight on the empty sky." And she managed to incorporate these beliefs, these Taoist influences, I think, within her writing in a way that seems real and genuine to the worlds that you find yourself in. I suppose it's true to say that as a writer, while always in tune for the needs for a real, genuine political revolution, which I'm coming to, she was always deeply concerned with the need for cliche alert and internal revolution. Now, I realise as I'm saying this, so that there'll be some people here who think that these words are definitely running the risk of being a middle-class bourgeois affectation by those with the time and means for self-reflection, growth, but there we go. I think it was very important to Le Guin. But she did not then, or ever, just live in an airy world of literature forums and yoga classes and so on. She was an activist, as she writes. All through the 60s, in my home cities in the States, I'd been helping organise and participate in non-violent demonstrations, first against atomic bomb testing, then against the pursuance of the war in Vietnam. Now listen to this, how she describes it. She was never any mealy-mouthed liberal. She never sat on the fence as far as I could see in her writing. She would speak truth to power as she saw it. This is how she describes the Vietnam War. "The murder of non-combatants in the name of peace was only a corollary of the ethic which permits the despoliation of natural resources for private profit." Ursula Guin was a radical. She was a child of the 60s. Well, actually, much earlier than that, but she, influenced by that, the convulsions on the campuses of the day. So she was familiar with the language of these political radicals that she'd grown up in this world. And she was, I might suggest, much more confident in her usage than any other writer of her stature that I'm aware of, really, of this greatness. And she uses them readily throughout her work. Words like socialism and class and anarchism, she understood what they meant and she used them accurately and well. To give you a sense of this, this is her opening page in this collection of essays. And she's talking here about literature debates. And she writes this: "The two speeches that begin and end the book address much the same issues, but the difference is striking. The literary critical debate of 1972 appears 42 years later as an element of the struggle of imaginative art to exist at all in the increasingly hostile economic and moral environment of corporation capitalism. You know, I think some of the things she wrote could very easily be in the Morning Star, you know, the Weekly Worker. She's comfortable in this world. Wizard of Earthsea was written in 1968, and over the next few years, she would go on to write work after work, which would cement her place in world literature. All, it is worth saying, as a female writer in a male-dominated world. Le Guin took her work seriously, and I think this still comes as a shock as to the literary establishment who, if fiction was not a sober realist, whatever that means really when you're talking about fiction, about the human condition in a recognisable earth, was scornful. And she was always on the front foot in her life as a feminist in defence of abortion. She speaks movingly of that later in her life. She had one when she was a younger woman, and she was very affected by it. And as a radical, and in her defence of the fantastical worlds which are often and still today viewed disparagingly. As she puts it, we who hobnob with hobbits and tell tales about little green men are quite used to being dismissed as mere entertainers or sternly disapproved of as escapists. Now, I think she had a sore point on this. I think she must have been aware that this view would be particularly prevalent amongst the literary, political, liberal, radical circles that she moved in. But she turns it back on them. She thinks it's her critics who are missing out. She writes this: the habit of reducing text to political economic terms has prevented many Marxian and neo-Marxian critics from reading fantasy at all. They see kings and assume reactionary politics. That's a mistake. But as she says, the scientist who creates a monster in the laboratory, a librarian in the Library of Babel, a wizard unable to cast a spell, a spaceship having trouble in getting to Alpha Centauri, all these may be precise and profound metaphors of the human condition. Fantasists, whether they use the ancient archetypes of myth and legend or the younger ones of science and technology, may be talking as seriously as any sociologist and a good deal more directly about human life as it is lived and as it might be lived and as it ought to be lived. I'll read that bit again. About human life as it is lived and as it might be lived and as it ought to be lived. Le Guin is not just interested in interpreting the world, she was always interested in changing it. I think some of you might recognise that sentence. Now, one of her most famous works is The Left Hand of Darkness. If you change the slide, Tina, I think, onto that. Published in 1969, it remains for me the single most compelling book that I've read on gender and its consequences. Now, The Left Hand of Darkness is set in Le Guin's richly imagined Hainish universe. Now, in this book, the main character is a Lee Garratt. He's a diplomat sent from the Ecumen. Think a kind of utopian United Nations. They're similar to Star Trek. They're meant to observe, assist where necessary, but generally be a good, gentle force for good. His mission, though, is a difficult one. It's to persuade these aliens, the Gethen, to join them. But he's thrown into this world of complex kind of politics, and one way much more complex by the sexual nature of the Gethin, for they are truly androgynous, who at regular periods they enter a kind of period of shift gretha, which is kind of like heat in effect, where they kind of choose to be a male or female. Now, it's a fascinating book. In it, you see the main character, this heterosexual male, Genli I, questioning everything he knows, assumes about sexuality and gender. There's a discussion here later, it's quite late in the book, and it's between Genli I and the other character, the Gethin, who becomes very friendly with. This is the Gethin speaking, the androgynous person. Finally, he asked, had he offended me? I explained my silence with some embarrassment. I was afraid he would laugh at me. After all, he is no more of an oddity, a sexual freak than I am. Up here on the ice, each of us is singular, isolate. I as cut off from those like me, from my society and its rules, as he from his. There is no world for the other Gethenians here to explain and support my existence. We are equals at last, equal, alien, alone. He did not laugh, of course. Rather, he spoke with a gentleness that I did not know was in him. After a while, he too came to speak of isolation, of loneliness. Your race is appallingly alone in this world. No other mammalian species, no other ambisexual species, no animal intelligent enough even to domesticate as pets. It must colour your thinking, this uniqueness. I don't mean scientific thinking, only though you are extraordinary hypothesizers, it's extraordinary that you arrived at any concept of evolution, faced with that unbridgeable gap between yourselves and the lower animals. But philosophically, emotionally, to be so solitary in so hostile a world, it must affect your entire outlook. The Ameshta would say that man's singularity is divinity. Lords of the earth, yes. Other cultures and other cults and other worlds have come to this same conclusion. They tend to be the cults of dynamic, aggressive, ecology-breaking cultures. Orgaven is the pattern in a way. At least they seem bent on pushing things around. What do the Handurata say? Well, in the Handara, there's no theory, no dogma. Maybe they're less aware of the gap between men and beasts, being more occupied with the likenesses, the links, the whole of which living things are a part. Thomas Lay had been on all day in my mind, and I said the words, light is the left hand of darkness, and darkness the right hand of light. Two are one, life and death lying together like lovers in Kama, like hands joined together like the end and the way. So again, you're probably picking up on these pretty explicit Taoist references. So why did she do this? For Le Guin, she was always bringing her fantastical back to real human societies. And in this book, most pertinent was gender. She writes on her book, the subject of my experiment then was something like this. Because of our lifelong social conditioning, it is hard for us to see clearly what, besides purely physiological form and function, truly differentiates men and women. Are there real differences in temperament, capacity, talent, psychic processes, etc.? There was also, at that time, and since, an argument about the use of the pronouns in the book, which, seen as it was written in 1969, seems to me something ahead of a curve. Now, she writes this, and wait till I've finished all this bit. So, in 1976, she was responding to her critics, because in this book, she refers to the Gethenians as he. She writes, the criticism, this rises in part from the choice of pronoun. I call Gethenians he because I utterly refuse to mangle English by inventing a pronoun for he, she, now. There's a footnote here, footnote 11. And if I go down to the bottom, this is her later writing. So this is what she writes in her later years. This utter refusal of 1968, restated in 1976, collapsed utterly within a couple of years more. I still dislike invented pronouns, but now dislike them less than the so-called generic pronoun he, him, his, which does in fact exclude women from discourse, and which was an invention of male grammarians. For until the 16th century, the English generic singular pronoun was they, them, their, as it still is in English and American colloquial speech. Now, I'm less concerned here with the debate over pronouns, but what I find noteworthy here is what I think is the crucial part of being a genuine radical, the willingness always to question one's views and to change them if necessary. The radical who is confined by what they think becomes, I think, just someone who parrots, in the end, ultimately parrots dogma. The dialectic, at least as I understand it, is predicated on change, on growth. Now, even in this brief talk, hopefully you're getting something of a flavour of the wide-ranging nature of Le Guin's creations. She was always creating. As she said, to create is to discover something, is to make it. She quotes Julius Caesar here, actually, quite amusingly, who writes, the existence of Britain was uncertain until I went there. She was aware of the critique, often well-founded, of the vacuousness of much speculative fiction and for the need of it to respond to real human needs. Let's get this page. Oh. She writes this, still, I see much current fantasy and science fiction in full retreat from real human needs, where a token, she was a big fan of Tolkien, by the way, that's another debate, where a token pathetically faced the central fact of our time, our capacity to destroy ourselves, the present space of so-called heroic fantasy, in which good defeats evil by killing it with a sword or staff or something phallic, seems to have nothing in mind beyond instant gratification, the avoidance of discomfort. In a fake medieval past where technology is replaced by magic and wishful thinking works. But the science fiction books about endless wars in space where technology is magic and the killing proceeds without moral or psychological justification of any kind probably are written from the same unadmitted despair. Yeah, she's not interested in that kind of fiction. In The Lathe of Heaven, this book, she deals directly with these real human needs. The protagonist, a George Orr, he has the power to dream a new reality. Literally. So if he dreams of a less populated world, the next day in Portland, Oregon, where he lives, it's less populated, and actually everyone in that universe is not aware of any change. Now, Giorgio, like most of us, I suppose, would find this actually terrifying. However, there's a psychologist in this book. He's sent for therapy, Giorgio, and he's kind of frightened of it, but he also craves it. This psychologist in the book, he's like a do-gooder. We're thinking bureaucratic elites to Urs worker who sees the potential for creating a utopia, to use Urs' ability to create a new world. You're probably not surprised to learn, even if you've not read the book, that this doesn't go well. Like a lot of attempted utopias in the 20th century, it doesn't really work. Things keep going wrong. I'll just read a little section to show this. The crash, the carcinogenic plague, which had reduced human population by 5 billion in 5 years, another billion in the next 10, had shaken the civilizations of the world to their roots. The air was still profoundly and irremediably polluted. So every time they make a change, it's problem upon problem. Le Guin is wary of utopias. She wrote, "It seems that the utopian imagination is trapped, like capitalism and industrialism and the human population, in a one-way future consisting only of growth." And she quotes Milan Kundera on this, who wrote, "Once the dream of paradise starts to turn into reality, however, here and there, people begin to crop up who stand in its way. And so the rulers of paradise must build a little gulag on this side of Eden. In the course of time, the gulag grows ever bigger and more perfect, while the adjoining paradise gets ever smaller and poorer." In The Dispossessed also is a very ambitious work, and one to my mind. Do you want to show the copy of it, Tina? I'll show you. The Dispossessed also is a very ambitious work, and one to my mind, rarely done. In this imagined world, you've got a moon, which has been colonized by this community who were exiled from their home planet 2 centuries before for their self-avowed anarchist beliefs. And this whole book deals with, it's a science fiction book, right? But it deals with really, mostly, the reality of an anarchist society in a very harsh world. The problems, if you will, of the reality of trying to have a revolution in one place versus the internationalists, of which the protagonist, Shevik, is one. Now, Shevik is a physicist, and he ends up, because of problems on his home society, having to go to the archist world. I had to look up that word, I didn't know what archist meant. Anarchist, archist. He has to go to the archist world to develop his theories due to tensions where he comes from. Now, he really struggles with the reality he faces because he's grown up in this anarchist society. He writes, he got money for the papers he wrote. He already had in his account in the National Bank the 10,000 international monetary units of the Say Own Award and a grant of 5,000 from the IOTA government. At first, all this seemed funny to him, then it made him uneasy. He must not dismiss as ridiculous what was, after all, of tremendous importance here. He tried to read an elementary economics test. It bored him past endurance. It was like listening to someone interminably recounting a long and stupid dream. He could not force himself to understand how banks functioned and so forth, because all the operations of capitalism were as meaningless to him as the rites of a primitive religion, as barbaric, as elaborate, and as unnecessary. In a human society that sacrificed the deity, there might at last be a mistaken and terrible beauty in the rites of the money changers, where greed, laziness, and envy were assumed to move all men's ranks. Even the terrible became banal. Shevik is a revolutionary to his bone, and he argues for the ideals of the revolution. There's a discussion here, interesting discussion here, with one of his friends. And this is his friend arguing back at him. "I can't argue the value of Adoniism. Adoniism, think Karl Marx. He's the founder of this society. Adoniism with you. Not that I haven't wanted to. I do know something about it, We're a lot closer to it in my country than these people are. We're products of the same great revolutionary movement of the 8th century. We're socialists like you. But you are anarchists. The state of Thu, this is Shevik speaking, the state of Thu is even more centralized than the state of AIO. One power structure controls all, the government, administration, police, army, education, laws, trades, manufacturers, and you have the money economy." Moving over there to show the other person. "A money economy based on the principle that each worker is paid as he deserves for the value of his labour, not by capitalists whom he's forced to serve, but by the state of which he's a member. Does he establish the value of his own labour? Why don't you come to Thu and see how real socialism works?" "I know how real socialism functions," Garratt said. "I could tell you, but would your government let me explain it in Thu?" All this is in a science fiction book. I'll go on because I think this might be of interest to a few people on here tonight. Here we go. So he kind of gets dragged into an uprising. And this is someone speaking to him, trying to persuade him. Made it, nodded. A demonstration's been announced for 3 days from now against the draft, war taxes, the rising food prices. There's 400,000 unemployed in Neo-Essia and they jack up taxes and prices. He'd been watching Shevek steadily all the time they talked. Now, as if the examination was done, he looked away, leaning back in his chair. This city's about ready for anything. A strike's what we need, a general strike, and massive demonstrations, like the 9-month strike that Odo led. We could use an Odo now, but they've got no moon to buy us off with this time. We make justice here or nowhere. He looked back at Shevek and presently said in a softer voice, do you know what your society has meant for us here this last 150 years? Do you know when people here want to wish each other luck, they say, may you get reborn in an Aris, to know that it exists, to know that there's a society without government, without police, without an economic exploitation. They can never say again that it's just a mirage, an idealist dream. Now, eventually, Shevek takes part in this kind of uprising in the society, and he does this fantastically moving speech. I'll read a bit of it here. I am here because you see in me this promise, the promise kept that we made 200 years ago in this city, the promise kept. We have kept it on Anaris. We have nothing but our freedom. We have nothing to give you but your own freedom. We have no law but the single principle of mutual aid between individuals. We have no government but the single principle of free association. We have no states, no nations, no presidents, no premiers, no chiefs, no generals, no bosses, no bankers, no landlords, no wages, no charity, no police, no soldiers, no wars. Nor do we have much else. We are sharers, not owners. We are not prosperous. None of us is rich. None of us is powerful. If it is an Ares you want, if it is the future you seek, then I tell you that you must come to it with empty hands. You must come to it alone and naked as a child comes into the world, into his future, without any past, without any property, wholly dependent on other people for his life. You cannot take what you've not given, and you must give yourself. You cannot buy the revolution. You cannot make the revolution. You can only be the revolution. It is in your spirit or it is nowhere. Great stuff. So, the Guin talks politics all the time in her books and elsewhere. What I liked about her was she wasn't one of these post-fall of the Berlin Wall who suddenly saw, the error of the ways and realised, nah, she writes this. Some of the alternatives that exist in the past had promise. I think socialism did and still does, In perhaps her most famous work of all, it's a short story. It's called Those Who Walk Away from Omelas. And you see it all over the place. Any collection of great short stories, it's often in there. In this short story, Le Guin gives full play to her desire to play with big issues. Now, it's only a few pages long, and there's a big spoiler here, actually. If you want to read a fantastic short story and you've not read it, then maybe miss this bit. I'd say it's actually, I'd advise you to miss this bit because this is better than anyway. Right, but hopefully a few of you read it and you can listen to what I'm going to say. So, in the opening sentences of this short story, Le Guin places us in a kind of joyous utopia. I'm going to read from the start. Again, we're going to see the power of her words. With a clamour of bells that sets the swallows soaring, the festival of summer came to the city Omelas, bright towered by the sea. The rigging of boats in the harbour sparkled with flags. In the streets between houses with red roofs and painted walls, between old moss-grown gardens and under avenues of trees, past great parks and public buildings, processions moved. Some were decorous. Old people in long, stiff robes of mauve and grey, grave master workmen, quiet, merry women carrying their babies and chatting as they walked. In other streets, the music beat faster, shimmering of gong and tambourine, and the people went dancing. The procession was like a dance. Children dodged in and out, their high calls rising like the swallows crossing flights over the music and the singing. And I could go on. There's boys, there's girls, there's long-eyed arms, there's horses. It's beautiful, this place. Okay, page after page, we describe this beautiful utopia, and you wonder what's coming. Now, close your ears at this point if you don't want a massive spoiler. There is a flaw, and after pages spent describing this amazing place, she sets it up brilliantly with this rhetorical question. Do you believe? Now she's speaking to us, the reader. Do you believe? Do you accept the festival, the city, the joy? No? Then let me describe one more thing. I find this hard to read. In a basement under one of the beautiful public buildings of Romulus, or perhaps in a cellar of one of its spacious private homes, there is a room. It has one locked door and no windows. A little light seeps industrially between cracks in the boards, second-hand from a cobweb window somewhere across the cellar. In one corner of the little room, a couple of mops with stiff, clotted, foul-smelling heads stand near a rusty bucket. The floor is dirt, a little damp to the touch, as cellar dirt usually is. The room is about 3 paces long and 2 wide, a mere broom closet or disused tool room. In the room, a child is sitting. It could be a boy or girl. It looks about 6, but actually it's nearer 10. It's feeble-minded. Perhaps it was born defective, or perhaps it has become imbecile through fear, malnutrition, and neglect. It picks its nose and occasionally fumbles vaguely with its toes or genitals as it sits hunched in a corner furthest from the bucket and the 2 mops. It is afraid of the mops, finds them horrible. It shuts its eyes, but it knows the mops are still standing there, and the door is locked and nobody will come. The door is always locked, and nobody ever comes, except that sometimes the child has no understanding of time or interval. Sometimes the door rattles terribly and opens, and a person or several people are there. One of them may come in and kick the child to make it stand up. I will be good, it says. Please let me out, I will be good. They never answer. Now, this is Romulus, and that's the deal that they made. The people who live in this utopia, that's the deal. There's always going to be one child living in this misery. And this book, this story is titled The Ones Who Walk Away, because at the end of the book, we see that a few people can't take this deal. Even if they know the reality that they're not going to be able to create a world as good as this because the cost is too high. Just that one life, that one person is too high. What is this? I think it's Le Guin looking at the reality of life and not shirking away. What are we to do in the face of misery, in the face of hardship? She rejects utilitarianism. For her, there is, and for all genuine radicals, there is only ever resistance. Now, I'm going to finish with her words. And I'm going to choose something I see often now on Facebook and stuff, but I think to get the full power of it, you need to get the full thing. So this was a speech we made in 2014. I'm going to finish with this if you're getting a bit fed up. Well, it shouldn't be taking too long. In 2014, she got given the National Book Award Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters Acceptance Speech. Sorry, she got given a National Book Award Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters, and this was her acceptance speech at a fancy do. Thank you, Neil, and to the givers of this beautiful award, my thanks from the heart. My family, my agent, editors, know that my being here is their doing as well as mine, and that the beautiful reward is theirs as much as mine. And I rejoice at accepting it for and sharing it with all the writers who were excluded from literature for so long, my fellow authors of fantasy and science fiction, writers of the imagination who, for the last 50 years, watched the beautiful awards go to the so-called realists. I think hard times are coming when we will be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now and can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and can even imagine some real grounds for hope. We will need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, the realists of a larger reality. Right now, I think we need writers who know the difference between the production of a market commodity and the practice of an art. Developing written material to suit sales strategies. Remember, this room is going to be full of publishers. In order to maximize corporate profit and advertising revenue is not quite the same thing as responsible book publishing or authorship. Thank you, brave applauders. Some people must have applauded at that point. Yet I see sales department giving control over editorial. I see my own publishers in a silly panic of ignorance and greed, charging public libraries for an ebook 6 or 7 times more than they charge customers. We just saw a profiteer try to punish a publisher for disobedience and writers threatened by corporate fatwa. And I see a lot of us, the producers who write the books and make the books, accepting this. letting commodity profiteers sell us like deodorant and tell us what to publish. She's in her 70s here, I think, maybe 80s. Anyway, she goes on, and what to write? Well, I love you too, darling. Books, you know, they're not just commodities. The profit motive often is in conflict with the aims of art. We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begins in art, and very often in our art, the art of words. I have had a long career and a good one, in good company. Now here, at the end of it, I really don't want to watch American literature get sold down the river. We who live by writing and publishing want and should demand our fair share of the proceeds. But the name of our beautiful reward is not profit. Its name is freedom. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Ursula Guin, The Radical Worlds.
Thank you very much, Lee. Fantastic, really entertaining and enthusiastic and passionate. I think I've started reading The Dispossessed because in preparation for this session, and I can really recommend it. The Ones Who Walk Away is quite famous, isn't it? That's been made into a short film as well. I think I've seen it before.
Has it? Yeah, it's made into a little short film or something.
I'm pretty sure I've not read it. I think I've seen it somewhere, but it's good. It's a famous thing that sticks in your mind. Because you do think, as a Marxist, as a communist, you think, well, there are other options than just walking away, isn't it? You free the bloody child, you'd overturn this system, etc. So it made me angry at the time, I think, reading it. But I like that about her, actually, reading The Dispossessed as well. It's not black and white, isn't it? She does a lot of grayscale. You're listening to the description of both these worlds in The Dispossessed, for example. One is supposed to be, one is the better one, morally better. The other one is capitalism. But you don't really want to live in either, do you? That sort of that anarchism, socialism.
I think she's a real human, and she's got a cracking sense of humor, and she's never po-faced, which some people on the left can be, well, on the right as well. But, so to read her is to read a, real intelligent woman wrestling with because, to be on the radical left, it's a struggle, right? And in books like The Dispossessed, she tries to deal with some of the issues that arise from these things. The imagined utopia and things. Yeah, she's great.
And I do like about it, it's and somebody put that in the comment quite right. It's you think this is okay, this is a kind of socialism, but it's actually sort of going back rather than forward. Sort of our socialism has the idea of abundance. We envisage socialism as there's so much, we can produce things so easily. It leaves us a lot of time to live.
Yeah, she's very much on the eco strand of like Marxism, really. She's anti-growth, really. She's very much influenced by environmental ideas and so on. So, she's suspicious of growth, and she's suspicious of the left, socialism, using that as a panacea as well. And I think she's right to do that. Really. She's right to be suspicious and cynical of it.
Well, I mean, there's a degrowth communism, which I don't think is a really good idea. But I mean, as a socialist, as a Marxist, I would say that it's not based on growth in the sense of we need more stuff. Everybody needs their own private car. Everybody needs one. Everybody needs this. But you would sort of, you would live differently. When we would live differently, we don't need this stuff anymore. Yeah. But I mean, I think her world in The Dispossessed is like they're working like 8 to 10 hours in that anarchy social world, which is not very attractive, is it? I mean, that's for us.
Hard. It's really hard. Yeah, it's a really hard world. But to get onto The Dispossessed, it's kind of awe-inspiring how people like Shevik are still so in love with the revolution. So you get the flavour of these. And we always have it, don't we? We've always had these people in the movement who will dedicate their lives to it. And in Shevik, I think you've got a real revolutionary of literature, actually. I'm not reading it again. I'm shaking this desk, aren't I? Reading it again, I didn't I kind of forgot that bit, just how hardcore Shevik is. Yeah, brilliant.
So if anybody, comments, if anybody has a question as well or would like to make a comment, please click raise hand. Otherwise, I'll ask you some more questions. I will have a bit more of a discussion. Because
I
mean,
should say actually, I don't pretend to be an expert on Ursula K. Le Guin or something. I'm just an enthusiast, you know. So.
Yeah. Well, she was, I'm sure, and that sort of reflects in her writing, of course, affected by the existence of the Soviet Union. You know, that filters through the whole time. You know, this whole the Gulag question. You know, quoting Milan Kundera, etc.
Well, I do like the way that, because I suppose now I think we're coming out of that shadow. Actually, I think we've been out of it for quite a long time. But you know, someone of my age, I suddenly saw, you know, all the people I liked suddenly stopped using the word socialism in 1991. You know, they were scared of it. And everyone seemed to like, you know, there was all that living Marxism stuff. And it was all like, oh, all right. Oh, so you knew it all, you know. But Le Guin never did. She carries on with this. And as she says it there, you know, she saw through that really. She had a deeper understanding than some of the charlatans who attach themselves and then quickly jump ship. Yeah.
Interesting, but yeah, it does show in her writing that, you know, she understands that the reality of trying to build a different system, you know, is going to be possibly hard if you don't have abundance. You know, if you have to start somewhere afresh, if you have to build an utopia away from the others or isolated, that's going to be really hard. So I think it's quite a realistic view of trying to build a not necessarily one where you think, oh yeah, let's do that, you know, but a realistic view, which I think is very entertaining. So do you know what her attitude was to the Soviet Union? I know she rejected an award because the people of that prize had like excluded a guy who went to the Soviet Union. And, you know, in protest to that, she rejected their prize. Do you know what her kind of political attitude towards the Soviet Union was?
Oh, I don't really, actually. No more detail. That's interesting. I've never heard that story. No, I don't. I mean, I imagine I don't think I read the full quote out there, but you know, from my reading of it, I'm pretty sure her reading of the Soviet Union was a revolution that failed, right? And I think I finished off the. But she mentions men in particular, men with dreams of power hijacked it and so on. But she separates that failure, as she sees it, from the promise of socialism, which of course is something I'd ascribe to. You know, it's she doesn't lump it all in and say, oh well, that's it, it failed. You know, you hear that all the time, don't you? It failed. She doesn't do that. She's more.
Go on. Sorry.
No, she's more intelligent than just doing that, taking that simplistic position.
I also think you read out her attitude to sci-fi and sort of criticizing the Marxians, which sounds like the Marx, doesn't it? The Marxists, not the Martians, but for rejecting a sci-fi. But it's quite right, isn't it? Good sci-fi is about today, isn't it? It's about this society, and you extrapolate from it, or you something
probably gives you more. I mean, you know, I'm speaking as someone who's a fan of this genre, but I kind of think it gives writers more freedom in a way, because you can play with ideas. You can imagine a society, a moon that's been set up by anarchist revolutionaries, and then you can talk through the consequences. So it actually gives you more freedom, because in our time, there's only been one history, isn't there? You can imagine different histories and play around with it. So maybe not to everyone's taste, but certainly to mine, because I find it more invigorating, really, some of the debates that come up. Yeah, but Guin was scornful of writers who just, and actually I quite like this kind of as well, it's like my escapism, but you know, the writers who just dwell in woods and talk about little creatures and dwarves, and you know, she's pretty scornful of that. For her, she's got this sociologist inside her. She wants to be tackling real human issues all the time. So yeah, I think for anyone who reads the Weekly Worker who wants to get into science fiction, she's probably the one to choose. Well, there's others actually, but no, she's definitely well up there.
Well, the gender fluidity is interesting, isn't it? That really touches on her work or her experience with anthropology, because there are quite a lot of societies actually, or there were, where people play with that all the time. The
Yeah.
hunter-gatherer society, they're dressing up as men dressing up as women, and it's
Yeah.
all quite fluid. So that is quite
Yeah,
advanced.
she really shifted. There's a real shift, She really shifted, and it's interesting because yeah, she wasn't having any of it in the 70s. She was just going, no, I just think these invented pronouns don't like them. And then yeah, in the essay I'm reading from where she reconsidered it, she's in her 70s now. I don't know about yourself but I think it's very easy as we get older to kind of get more hidebound. And she's an example of someone who doesn't do that. She will grapple with these issues and change her mind. And yeah, she's an example, really. And she's very much into the debate, right? She's very much into the kind of Socratic kind of, you can imagine her she beats herself up in one of the essays, I think, actually, for not being as what's the word, as an activist as she kind of drops out of the world because she's a writer, right? She goes into the world of literature. She's more on the sides of activism, but you can just see through her writing, she's into debate and getting to the truth of things through debate, and she's willing to take the cut and thrust of arguments. I've not really seen too much of that actually live, but certainly through letters. She was a person of letters of the essay. There's a brilliant thing I'm thinking of actually. She would respond to people as well, on local radio and on, if the Times Literary Supplement wrote something in, she'd write in and she'd take it on. Yeah, she was good. Yeah.
There is a quote actually, which I wrote down from the Dispossessed, which I really like, and I read that out quickly, which touches on this. She's saying, the idea is like grass. It craves light, it likes crowds, it thrives on crossbreeding, and it grows better for being stepped on.
Yeah, that's exactly it, isn't it? You said that to me, didn't you, when we were on a chat about this before? And it's a fantastic quote, that, and I think it does. I'm just having a look at the comments. It does sum up her attitude. Yeah, not to. Sometimes I think I'm a bit guilty of holding my ideas and not willing to go into the cut. But she's very much like you, T. Actually, she very much wants to chat and engage and debate and stuff. And like all good communists, all good.
Well, and self-criticism is, I think, is a really good way to be. So on that gender fluidity, I mean, have there been efforts to try and, she calls herself a feminist, but actually she seems to be sort of, today there's this whole debate which was before her time, but on which side would she come down?
No, that's
somebody's trying to hijack her.
I would be wary very much actually of saying any more than I have said, really. I think she would be very much on the what's the word? The tolerant side, the LGBT. She would be very much now, I think, on that side generally. Whether she would critique it or hedge it a little bit. It was interesting. She still said in the pronouns thing that, she still says she doesn't like them. She's she's purist and she's so it's interesting, but she as someone who's a Taoist, she doesn't deal in duality. Well, duality, she's happy in the middle there, isn't she, and going from one to the other. So no, I don't know. I don't think I'd like to quite be conclusive for her, but I think she'd be definitely more.
Yeah, because I think that trans question is not a question that you can answer in black and white, and I think that's anybody who's trying that is actually getting into a lot of trouble. So she's also written some interesting things about race, touching on race, and that I've seen a quote by her where she talks about her characters tend not to be white because the population isn't white.
There's a really interesting thing. What story is it? I think it's The Left Hand of Darkness, and I think there was now in that book. Trying to think of his Genly eye. Anyway, one of the characters it's not made a big deal of, but it's just mentioned in passing that he's a black person. And now in this 90s or 80s TV version, it's not, it's whitewashed. And she goes mad. This is the thing I'm thinking of. she goes in immediately. I think she rings up like local radio or something, and she slags it and just says, "This has got nothing to do with me." You know, she just goes. So no, she was. Yeah, no, she was anti-racist to a bone, I'd say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've read
well,
some.
she was quite. Yeah, aware of racism, aware of gender issues.
Mm. I've read that there's a lot of her books don't show people on the front cover because her main characters are black people, or then
I've not really thought that. Yeah,
and that the
yeah,
publisher thought in order to sell more books, they're not going to put them on the cover. There's on
yeah.
Wikipedia. I'm not sure if that's true, but
Oh,
that is.
really? Yeah, yeah. It kind of makes it doesn't. It makes it's very believable, that isn't it? Yeah, that doesn't sound something that's you can imagine a publisher doing that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking about it, I've not gone through the books, but now I'm thinking about different books. There are black characters who in most of the books I can think of. Yeah, but again, she just uses it. You know, it's not. She did that from the early days in the 60s, so very, very aware of these. Again, you know, I mean, I didn't, there's only so much you can do in a short talk. I could have lit it, well, I couldn't, but someone with more verse in this could have probably spoke more about her role as a woman. You know, I only really mentioned that in passing. You very easily could do this whole talk again, I think, because she was very passionate about gender and feminist issues and feminism. She talks a lot about feminism in her essays, and yeah, and I've not even touched on it, but I've got to remember that in the world that she grew up in, literature in general was a male thing, but science fiction and fantasy was nearly exclusively at this point, or at least the echelons of it were men. You know, they were Arthur C. Clarke. You know, and she went into this and was submitting stories to magazines. She writes quite movingly. At one point, I think she was really close to giving up. She's quite funny, actually. It's quite funny for people who write like me, just we're sending a little story now and again. But she kind of she writes something like, I was writing poetry and I got the odd story published, but there came a time where, I was either going to be a writer or not. There was no longer, I couldn't just keep getting the odd story published in a magazine. So, yeah, and then yeah, she got a big book published. But it kind of shows the, how tenuous it is as the life of a writer, really, where you get someone as famed now of her who came really close to kind of packing it all in, really.
I think, and I've read that at the beginning she was asked to submit her story again, and without the first name, which happens to a lot of women writers, of course. So just
really?
initial, like Jake Rowling.
It's hard to imagine that, really. Well, for me.
Oh, you're stuck. Oh, he's gone. Let's hope you. Oh, are you back? There you are. What happened there? You're back. You have to unmute, Comrie. For some reason, your microphone got.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it just had a weird crash. Can't remember what I was saying.
It's about the male, sort of she was asked to only use her initial rather than her full.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm just saying that's hard to, well, I think I was just about to say it probably shows my, unconscious biases, but it's hard for me to imagine that. But obviously, that's a real thing for her. Yeah. And again, I think it probably shows the biases of the world. Even now, if you go to, and I have actually, I've been for my sins, I've been to a few science fiction conventions and I like them, it's my kind of world, but, it's very male heavy, people with t-shirts and stuff. And so you can imagine a young, if you look at, a lot of the pictures are from her when she's an elderly woman because she lived a very, good life. But, she's a young, glamorous woman. You can imagine that, she wasn't natural fit for this world of smoking, obese men. Being a bit damning there, science fiction writing, but yeah.
What about her style then? I've read quite a few comments that she had quite an unusual style. I mean, you mentioned she's quite a straightforward writer, but she also played a little bit with narrative and sort of speaking as, the main character and then going back to something else and playing a little bit with structure. Does it always work for you?
Yes, it does. I was just thinking about that, I've not read much literary criticism of her actually, so I've only ever taken my kind of impression of her. And as a child, sometimes you kind of think someone who's doing something like this is kind of reimagining the past. But no, I remember as a child being deeply attracted to this plainness. Plainness is a funny word, actually. It's probably a better word in a different language, isn't there? Because plainness, there's something slightly negative about it. But she's got this very clear, lots of her vocabulary. She drops in words quite accurately, but lots of. I think even her, books for adults, probably readily understandable by any child of 11. Some of the themes wouldn't be suitable, but they're very clear. And for me at the time when I was reading these books, I was reading a lot of just on the bookshelves of the library. There'd be a lot of British authors from the 19th century, child authors. C.S. Lewis, I like C.S. Lewis actually, but the syntax and the sentences so much more complex and convoluted and Dickensian and. No, she was very austere, which I liked. Interestingly for me, because I'm an Ernest Hemingway fan, massive Ernest Hemingway fan. I love Ernest Hemingway. She hates Ernest Hemingway, properly hates him. But she just called because he's such a macho kind of fella. I think she just thinks he's a bit of a joke. She's always taking the mickey out of him. But what I find funny about that is and I don't know if it's just me, I've never read this anywhere, I actually find her writing style and Hemingway's writing style, for me, something very similar. It's immediate, it's plain, it's not fussy, it's clear sentences, but I don't think she would have liked that comparison. Yeah.
Subject matter perhaps different.
Yeah.
So you're a writer yourself, Lee. I mean, we know.
I feel like being mentioned as a writer after being told, yeah, right, yeah. But
we know
that's a bigger word, isn't it? Yeah.
But you've written quite a bestseller, which was the anti-Semitism.
Still selling that. Still selling well. It's still doing all right. That
It was about Chris Williamson.
Should I get it? Should I show it while we're talking?
Show it into the screen. It's called Labor, the Anti-Semitism Smear Campaign, I think, and the Destroying of an MP, which I think Chris Williamson worked with you on, and that's a very interesting book. If you could find it somewhere, I do.
Yeah, sorry.
You should have.
So this one, so Labour, the anti-Semitism crisis. Oh, it's all dusty, and the destroying of an MP. Yeah.
You were the first.
And if anyone wants to sign copy.
I mean, you were actually the first who came out with a book about the Corbyn years. I think there's now dozens of them, but this is one of your critical ones, and you're also quite critical of Corbyn and the Corbyn leadership and what they've done to Chris Williamson. And credit to you for that, because that's not it's still a tricky one for many lefties to get their head around, that we actually need to criticize what Corbyn did and because we're going to repeat it again. So well done for that. But you are a fiction writer yourself. So how do you, as somebody who's interested in politics and stuff, and writing fiction, how do you see the biggest challenges as for you?
For me, I mean, I've talked to you about this before, but I mean, for me, literally, it's just. It was COVID. I'm always worried about mentioning this because I realise that for some people listening, that could be a terrible time for them. So I don't want to mention it. But for me, from my experience of it, I'm not making light of other people's suffering. But for me, I'm a teacher. So basically, I went from working all the time, being knackered all the time, to having months off paid or years, long time off. And even when we went back, it was, and I say off, largely had the day to myself. And I had dabbled in writing. So for me, it was suddenly having the time of the rich and leisured classes, right? So suddenly having the time of someone in the 20s, and I get quite bitter about, the people who just have money and they can afford to be an artist, right? And then suddenly, just through this weird thing, it was a time for misery for a lot of people. I had this time, and I wrote, and I got things published. So my biggest challenge now is working a 5-day week, because if I'm honest, I'm 52 and I get home and I'm knackered. I'm too tired to write. But that's the reality for most people, right? That's the reality for most workers, which is, why the arts are dominated by the middle classes, right? Because it comes down to the harsh economic facts of it. You work all day, you're tired, you come home, you put yourself some tea, do some washing up, you go to bed, right? Unless, you might be super, super driven. There's always these examples, and you might be in your 20s and be able to. Stephen King's quite damning, actually, because he's people like me. He goes, well, when I was in my 20s, I came home from teaching and I put my kids to bed and I stayed up till midnight writing. Well, I can't do that. Maybe I could have done in my 20s, but I was doing other things with my time.
He probably wasn't a very good teacher if he could do.
Maybe, yeah. So with some bitterness, it is difficult for me because I'd love to spend my time just writing, really, because I love it. I love it. I love writing. Properly do. And I kind of flatter myself I'm all right at it, really. I think I'm all right, but I can't put the time into it that I want. So holidays, and I'm lucky as a teacher than a lot of people, but sorry to dwell on me, but I suppose what we're talking about here, if you're talking about the difficulties of being a writer, I think we're talking about the difficulties here of being a working class creative person, really, and it's coming down to these things, right? You're trying to smash time on weekends, or in the old days, it's quite interesting because I grew up in Manchester in the 1980s and stuff, and a lot of musicians and creative stuff, and you listen to these people talk, and they went on the dole and they went in squats, right? For time, to get time to create. Now it's so much harder now. There's loads of people talk about this now. It's really hard to do that now, isn't it? There's debt. You go to university, you're in debt. You have to sell pizzas. There's no squats. It's hard. So it's even harder now. There's even less chance of working class breakthrough. So the arts are even more dominated by the middle classes.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. I suppose there's been a certain democratization through social media and YouTube channels, and so it's not been a one-way street. But for something like writing, where it does take time, I think the reality is it's always going to be a minority pursuit. And if you look at what happened in Britain, if you look at what happened in our writing, you look at writers like the author of Kes Canines and Alan Sillitoe and people like that. They came to prominence during a period where there was starting to be more of an equality in this country, where people were starting to get more time and more money and able to do these things. And we've actually just gone backwards, right? If you look at someone like Alan Sillitoe, he got a small payment. Alan Sillitoe is this famous, Nottingham, I'm sure I don't need to explain for most people, working class writer, working in factories. And he got this small payment for one of his stories. And with that payment, he went off to live on Mallorca for next to nothing, right? For like a year or two. For next to nothing. Ernest Hemingway, the same. All these writers, they were able to go and escape somewhere for a year or two and live on next to nothing. Now, there's probably still, someone could say, oh, well, there's this place in Sri Lanka I went and it was 50p for a beer. But, generally the world's got, Europe and most of the world's more brutal. So it stands to reason that the people with less time and less money, the working classes, will contribute less to anything like in the arts.
And when you have kids and you're a woman, then you can't even do the 1 year.
Exactly. I didn't even mention that, but yeah, you're going to have that as well as an extra burden, right? Yeah.
The thing I've read about Ursula K, she also had trouble, but she had a husband, so she had to scale back when she had kids and then do it part-time, etc. I think until she became a bit more famous, she also struggled, but she persevered, which brings up this question of abundance again, isn't it? Sort of, a society where you have to work 8-10 hours a day, that is, you're not going to be creative, are you? You're not going to be able to, or run society, learn how to, do politics, etc. So how were the challenges, or how do you create your the creative process as a socialist? Do you feel the need to create something better, a better society when you write about science fiction, or how does your socialism affect your writing?
I don't think I've been as explicit as that, Tina. I suppose it just feeds in my worldview into it. I have written, that's not quite true. I've written some very explicit political stories. I like a kind of a genre, like a subgenre, really, alternative history. alternative history stories. So yeah, that's one thing I've explored, some of these ideas personally. Yeah. And then managed to get them published in a very small little magazine here and there. So
For
yeah.
money?
Well, yeah, no, but science fiction allows you to play around with these ideas. It's hard though. I mean, it's interesting. Not many people, not many writers do non-fiction and fiction, because I've found writing the labour book and the fiction such different disciplines. So yeah,
you earned more money with the non-fiction, I think, did you?
I did. Yes. Yes. Thanks, comrades. I saw a couple of people who bought them on here. So cheers. But I mean, I'm not going to mention money here. It's vulgar to mention money, but we're not talking a lot of money.
I'll put a link in the email after this session. Thank you very much, Lee. I'd have no comment and nobody with their hand up, but that was a really interesting discussion. Thank you for joining us.
All right, cheers.
Comrades, if any of you have a particular subject that you're particularly interested in and you want to share and you want to tell us about it, please email us info@ymarks.com. And next week we're revisiting our new series on imperialism, second part, with Ian Spencer. Thank you very much, comrades.